Let me just,
Continue. Okay.
okay, sorry. I've been asked to talk with you about freelancing. I've been a freelance writer, I think in multiple lifetimes, but in this lifetime, ever since the 80s. And I earned my living at this. In the 80s, I had a full-time job, and I started slowly, taking a freelance assignment here and there. And then I realized, it didn't take long for me to realize that this is the kind of lifestyle I wanted. I liked the flexibility, the autonomy, the independence, and I'm very self-directed. I have a lot of motivation and self-discipline, which is definitely required for freelancing. Anyway, that evolved into a part-time job, and I started building up my freelancing more and more and more. I started setting boundaries, which is really important for freelancing. You can't just jump into the deep end of the pool. Boundaries like, okay, how much money do boundaries for success. How many people do I have to call every day? Or how many stories do I have to, peddle every day, or queries as they're called? How many editors should I contact? So boundaries really help, because then that helps you identify whether or not you're reaching your goals. So it didn't take long before I realized, like I said, that I wanted this lifestyle. And then I came home from work one day. I had a corporate job, great pay, great benefits. And I told my husband, I want to quit it all and do freelancing full time. He was sort of prepared because, like I said, I had been inch by inch toward this. So in the mid 90s, I began freelancing full time. And so I've been doing it ever since. I've got, I don't know, over maybe 2,000 articles. I've written everything and anything. As long as my name's on that paycheck, I'll do it. What a lot of people don't realizing is that you obviously need skill to be a freelancer. You need skill as a writer. So I'm going to assume that everybody watching this has that level of skill. Because if you don't, you'll get maybe an editor to hire you once, but not again. And you won't get repeat assignments, all right? So you have to have a high degree of skill, a high degree of self-discipline, and I can't emphasize this enough, because especially when the skill came, and this is the part I don't like about freelancing, you have nobody really to ask. Do you like this sentence? I'm having trouble with the transition. How about the ending to my story, the beginning to my story, whatever it is. It's not like you can knock on the door of a colleague or your boss to say, hey, I'm having trouble, giving this a title. You're it. If your business succeeds, it's all because of you. If your business fails, it's all because of you. You get all the credit, you get all the blame. So you have to be willing to accept that level of responsibility. There's really no one to come to your rescue, especially when it comes with IT. Your computer breaks. When I worked at a corporation, I just called a number, they came down and they fixed it. You don't have that when you're freelancing. Bookkeeping, all these little tiny things. You are a business. You are a one-person business. Now, you certainly can join groups, writing groups, and use those people as a sounding board. But with the level of stories that I wrote, the last 2 weeks I completed 4 stories, and I'm part-time. I'm sort of slowing down now, and that was 4 stories in 2 weeks, which is nothing. So because of the volume of stories you do, you can't always call a friend. So you've got to build your skill level and make sure that you feel comfortable and confident. And like I said, self-discipline. But one thing that helped me that a lot of people may not realize is I have a back room in my house. It's it could be a bedroom, whatever. I'm dedicated to freelancing. To whenever I go in this room, it means business. It means I'm going to work. And it can be the corner of a kitchen table. It doesn't have to be a room. It can be, like I said, a spare bedroom or whatever you've got. But for me, that really helped because it physically separated me from my personal life. So I would just recommend that if it may work for you. And keep in mind, this is like working in an office building. You're not going to go shopping in the middle of the day. You're not going to go to the movies with your girlfriends. Would your friends call you up? If you were working for Microsoft, as an example, as a writer, would they call you up and say, hey, let's go shopping in the afternoon? So self-discipline. I did 8 to 10 hours every day, Monday through Friday. See, somebody's dog is agreeing with me. Okay. Well, here's something that surprises a lot of people. And I said this before. Once you reach that certain level of writing, once you reach that skill level, okay, you almost have to be a better marketer than you do a writer. I mean, there are thousands of freelancers out there, some good, some not so good, some excellent. And don't think that opportunities are going to magically fall in your lap for 1 second. It is hard, hard work. I marketed every day for an hour or two. And what I mean by marketing is spinning story ideas. And that's something you get very, very good at very, very quickly. And I think, Alan, as a journalist, you'll know this as well. But let's say somebody, you have an idea, let's say about red cars as an example. Well, what about red cars? Red cars have been written about for 100 years, and there's been all kinds of story ideas about red cars. But maybe your story idea is, well, police stop more red cars for traffic violations than any other color. You have to think of unique ways to introduce your topic. And so when I was working full-time, I would get maybe 200 emails a day. And that's nothing. Editors get thousands. Okay, I would get 200 a day saying, pitch my story. And it was my job to take that story and say, okay, what do you know, the PR people, public relations people, some do a great job of spinning, some don't. Some are really straightforward. And those stories would never fly with my editors. There has to be a unique element to it. So that's where the creativity comes in. What about giraffes? So what, they have spots, so they're tall. We all know that. We live in Africa. But what about giraffes can you write about that nobody else has written about? And that's how you get the story ideas. So keep in mind, like I said, that freelancing is a business. Every business requires marketing. And if you don't like marketing, don't be a freelancer, seriously, because I didn't realize that when I started. And I was flailing and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't doing so well. And then it finally dawned on me, I had to spend an hour or so every day pitching story ideas to people. And I remember one time back in the 1990s, an association magazine, they paid really well, very, very well. But my portfolio was really slim. I only had a handful of articles. I'd say maybe at that time I maybe had 50 articles, which was nothing. And I don't know if this would work today, but back then I was trying to sell myself a little differently. And he told me, the editor, this is why he hired me. I said, give me a chance. Give me a chance to write 3 articles. Pay me a quarter, 25% of what you normally would pay anybody. If you don't like the articles, you don't owe me anything. You don't have to publish them. You'll never hear from me again. I did 3 articles for him. I am still writing for them over 20 years later. Okay. And he told me this was at that time, it was a unique approach, because he said, this is particularly why I didn't know you. You were an unknown variable. I didn't know if you could pull through. I didn't know if you honored deadlines. So that's what you have to find a way to differentiate your writing from others. And that's a big part of the marketing approach, the strategy. And flexibility too. Flexibility is part of your marketing. I don't know. It seems like just from the pictures on my screen that we're all old enough to remember the Life cereal commercial about Mikey, where 3 little boys are sitting at a table and there's a bowl of Life cereal there. And then, I'm sorry, Life cereal there. And the 2 boys don't want to eat it. And they say, oh, let's give it to Mikey. He'll eat anything. Well, one of my editors used to call me Mikey. Carol will do anything. You never, ever want to turn editors down over and over again because they won't call you back. It's just sort of like, excuse me, asking a friend to go shopping with you or to the movies or have dinner. And if they keep turning you down, you don't ask them anymore. You go elsewhere. Same thing here. So he used to call me Mikey, and the kinds of things I did everything that a lot of people didn't want to do. I used to do writing for Scholastic magazine. I think many of you would be familiar with Scholastic. And there was one project that the editor, he contacted a bunch of people. Nobody wanted to do it because it was boring. It was really basic. It was really below my skill level, but it paid. It paid pretty decent pay. And I would do it all the time. He was so excited that I accepted this job. He sent me flowers So I can't emphasize that enough too. Flexibility is very important. In starting, how I started freelancing was I had an idea about an older woman. She owned the very first movie theater in a city called Chandler, which is adjacent to Phoenix. I lived in Phoenix for a while. And she was probably in her late 80s. Well, at that time, Chandler was building a mega cineplex of 10, 15 movie theaters. So I got the idea, wouldn't it be cool to get her opinion? I interviewed her, wrote the story. That was my very first freelance story for a newspaper. And it made the front page of section B, which is the local section. Section A is usually national. And this made the front page. So it was the idea that caught them, the idea that caught the attention of the editor. So again, spinning, coming up with really unique ideas for stories is really important here too. Now, this last piece I'm going to talk about is reinvent your writing. Always reinvent yourself. I always tell people, I also speak to high school students. Next week, I'm speaking to middle grade students. And I always say, just because you graduate high school or college or whatever the scenario is, how far your degrees are, doesn't matter. You are always a learner. You never stop learning. So you have to not feel uncomfortable when an editor rips your story to shreds. It is not personal. Do not take it personal, because again, they won't hire you. I remember one of the first stories I ever wrote was ripped to shreds. And the editor said, he told me everything that was wrong with it, very little right with it. And I said, thank you, because I realized he's investing in me. So if an editor is willing to do that, they're investing in you. They see something. So appreciate it and take copious notes and follow their advice. One time and don't take what an editor says personally. Besides that, I had written a freelance piece for an editor. She was a very, very good journalist, and she owned a magazine. It was about advertising. And I wrote a feature for her, one of my very first pieces for her. And she called me up over the phone. Editors never call you. Now they text you, but they'll never text anyway. But she called me and she says, Carol, I just wanted to tell you that your story was, and then there was like a 4-second pause. Now, during those 4 seconds, I envisioned my career was over. Nobody would hire me. I'm a lousy writer. I mean, all these horrible negative things. And then she said, excellent. And I didn't realize I had been holding my breath. And I said, wow. Now, I really respected this woman. She was a great writer. And I said, thank you so much. I value your opinion. Please tell me why you think it was excellent. Now, how long did that take? I think your story was, and then a 4-second pause, and then excellent. And then what I said, what was that, 10 seconds? So within 10 seconds, she turned around and she said, well, you're just stupid. I said, what? She says, you don't even know me. Why would you value my opinion? You're just stupid. Don't take anything personal. You will have many, many bosses with freelance writing. There were times where I was working for 10, 15 editors at the same time. They all want different things. They all work different ways. Some want you to call them. Some want you to, this is even before internet. Some wanted you to call them. Some didn't. They all have their different styles of management. So get used to that. And that's where the part where the flexibility comes in. Reinventing your writing was the last point I wanted to make. I realized I have 5 minutes left. As I looked toward retirement, and I'm sort of retired right now, sort of, if my past editors give me stories, I take them, but I don't actively search for them now. About 8 years ago, I wanted to give back. I've had a very successful career as a writer and journalist. Not only have I done magazines, I've done guidebooks, I've done marketing collateral, everything from brochures, I've done press releases, anything that anybody needed written, blogs, websites. That's where the flexibility again comes in. But I wanted to do something for me, something fun. So I wrote a story. It's called The Adventures of Mo. And if you have grandkids or children who are around 8, 9 years old, it's free. It's called adventuresofmo.com. Mo as in Mozart, okay, M-O. So what I did was I said, let me see if I can pull this off. It took me 8 years because at that time I was still working full time. I'm a part-time caregiver for my husband and for my parents. And oftentimes life will get in the way or has gotten in the way. So I wrote a story about a dog who lives in Alaska who finds a keychain. It says Florida on it. Where is Florida? What is Florida? So he decides to return this key to its rightful owner. He thinks it's valuable. Everybody, all the animals in the forest thinks it's valuable. And what the uniqueness, the creativity, the spin, as I say, on this book is this. He travels with a bird on top of a delivery truck, unbeknown to the delivery driver, the truck driver. And they travel to every single state in the country. And every story, every chapter is about a different state. So kids learn cardinal directions. They learn a little bit history, a little bit geography. It's a fun series. That's the spin. I had talked to a elementary school teacher and she was retiring that year. She read it. She read the first 3 chapters and she said, I wish I had this when I was in school. There's nothing about cardinal directions. You've got to find that niche, that gap. Now, you talk about marketing. I've been in the midst of marketing this book since July, right after the 4th of July. And I have made so many mistakes and I've done so many wonderful things that it is just this is a learning process for me. And we've struck out sometimes and we've hit gold sometimes. And that's what you need to realize. I sent out 200 emails myself, 200 emails. I got 2 responses. And guess what? That's the norm. That's the norm when you talk about marketing. So when you send out your queries and things like that, they say you usually do, I think it's like a 3%, 2 or 3% of response. So in other words, for every 100 queries you send out, you're only going to get 2 people or 3 people responding, and then you're doing well. For Adventures of Mo, we got lucky. The state of Arkansas, because every chapter is about a different state, posted their chapter on their Facebook page. They liked it so much. The Kitbeak National Observatory, that's where one chapter takes place in Arizona. They wrote an article for their staff newsletter. That's incredible. Just to me, that was incredible. And things like this are happening. I had to hire a marketing person because I know nothing about social media marketing, absolutely nothing. And I am learning. I'm learning to do very different kinds of things. You have to post. You have to be in front of these people every single waking moment, but you don't necessarily promote yourself. Because of the nature of this book, I'm promoting things. Look how wonderful what this child did. Look at what this teacher did. This is a holiday, enjoy it. You promote yourself and you promote things that relate to your story or book. So that is how I have reinvented myself. Talk about self-discipline. This took me 8 years to complete. 50 chapters. It is almost 500 pages. I also hired, this is again, uniqueness. I also hired a high school student to do my line drawings. Part of it was economic because I didn't have the money to hire a professional, but I got lucky. He was fantastic. He observed deadlines. And that's the other thing I wanted to say, deadlines. If an editor says your deadline is Friday, count on it being Friday. Unless you get into a car accident or you're in a coma, there's no other reason why you missed that deadline. I've been writing for over 30 years, 25 years plus as a freelancer, and I have never missed a deadline. Kiss of death if you miss a deadline. So those are some of the things that I wanted to share with you. There's so much more. There's a ton more, and you are all welcome to call me, email me. I will help whoever, in whatever way I can. More than happy to talk with you about whatever situations you encounter. And sometimes brainstorming can help you, find a unique solution to that. So that's my pitch. I hope it was helpful. Thank you so much.
That was great, Carol. Thank you so much. It was very, very chock full of information. I wrote a whole page myself.
I'm going to mute this because of my dogs. All right. You can hear them in the background.
Yeah, no, I just said this was really great. And it really crosses over a lot of things for me as a first time writer, the whole promotion thing yeah, you have to do it every single day. I have a to-do list on my desk, and it's calling and calling again and calling again, and not taking it personally when they don't call back, and just going forward with your project. It's all, everything you've said is all very, all the pieces that come together about what you have to do, unless you're in a position to hire a great publicist and just hand it over to somebody and just take the royalty checks, which most of us.
Can
in
I
that
add
position-
one quick thing? May I add one quick thing?
Of course.
Okay, one last thing. I called a national organization that specialized, reading is fundamental. It's been around for many, many years, very well.
RIF, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Cold call. Didn't know anybody. And guess what? I got a telephone appointment with their VP about, Adventures Promote. Now, it didn't pan out, doesn't matter. It's still, I made a connection. So even so, don't say it never can be done. This was a complete cold call. I knew nobody. Give it a shot. You never know what can happen. All right, I will be quiet.
Carol, is it okay if I shared your email address with everybody?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Alan, would you like to go next?
Everybody, I really appreciate the chance to talk about writing. Carol did a hell of a job. She covered a lot of bases, and I thought she offered a lot of great advice. And in some ways, I kind of I'll probably reemphasize or parrot some of the things that Carol had mentioned. Let me just give you the quick background. I was a longtime newspaper reporter and writer. I worked in metropolitan New York City, South Florida for the Palm Beach Post and the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale, the Denver Post in Denver, Seattle Post Intelligencer, when that newspaper was still alive. And my life path took me to Las Vegas, where I worked for the Review Journal. And originally I covered government. And then in Denver, I was fascinated that sports teams can go to local government and say, give us free money and to build stadiums and arenas. I was kind of blown away by that. And I parlayed that whole concept into a new journalistic career path, which was the business of the sports industry, which I worked at several places covering that beat. And that is actually what I do right now. I publish a new site here in Las Vegas called lvsportsbiz.com. And I take basically all my journalistic skills and apply it to covering this incredible sports industry that we have here in Las Vegas. And I don't really cover the X's and O's of the sports. What I'm doing is covering this specific category of how the sports facilities are built. They're usually built under these so-called public-private partnership deals that we have. We have an unbelievable case example in our market. Allegiant Stadium is a $2 billion stadium project, and you, the public, you're contributing $750 million to help build that stadium. And it's actually more than that. During the course of 30 years, our market, Southern Nevada, will be raising more than $1 billion to pay off the $750 million, just like a mortgage. So even if you don't like sports, you actually have a lot at stake in the sports industry. There's new teams, there's rumors of new teams coming and new teams being born. So that's, I really, Carol's point about being original really resonated with me. My new site is, I have like a very specific mantra. It's for the PR folks out there. I'm probably going to insult you, but to me, press release equals death. For me, when I write for LV Sports Biz, I'm looking for originality. I'm looking for enterprise. I'm writing, I don't have the resources to compete with my old folks at the Review Journal. I don't have the resources or the technology at the TV stations, but what I have is the institutional knowledge that kind of puts me kind of ahead of those guys, because you have to fall back on on your institutional knowledge. And the whole point is to create original enterprise material that the other guys don't have. That is my secret sauce to lvsportsbiz.com. So that's my new site. I've been doing that for more than 4 years. I'm in my 5th year. I was just laughing with one of my former editors at the Palm Beach Post. I was chatting with him this morning, and I told him, Glenn, this is the longest time I've worked continuously for a news organization. I've worked for like 10 or 12 newspapers around the country, and my own news site here in Las Vegas is the longest continuous stint that I've had. And I'm going to kind of go into how the site was created, because it really goes into the 2 books that I wrote. I was working in Vero Beach. I was working at the Review Journal, left the Review Journal to do the go back to be close to family thing in the state of Florida. And on the west coast of Florida, I was bicycling and basically got run down by a distracted motorist. That's like a whole other issue that is something which I can talk your ears off about. But I ended that specific near tragedy motivated me to come back to Las Vegas to launch lvsportsbiz.com. In fact, I was so emotionally scrambled about being hit by the car. It was a pretty violent collision. Honestly, a lot of bicyclists would have been killed with, under that circumstance. I was very lucky. I still have much gratitude that I actually have my life still. And I decided to use that event to propel me back to Las Vegas to launch lvsportsbiz.com. I had a friend who I used to work with at the Denver Post. He came to visit me while I was healing back up. And he said, you covered the business of sports at the Review Journal. Just go back to Las Vegas and just keep on writing it and just launch your own site. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So I had a friend who kind of planted the seed. I definitely resonated with some of the Carol's points. Definitely resonated in terms of being self-motivated, self-disciplined. Those are things that you have to get pumped up to write about, because writing really is simply thinking, and thinking is simply the stuff that gets you going, that gets you wired. That's what kind of like makes you want to write more and more and more. And that's why it becomes almost, even though there's technical things about reporting and writing, at the end of the day, it's the joy of writing that actually propels you. And what do you feel joyful about? It's the things that just get under your skin. It doesn't have to be necessarily good. It has to be with what moves you emotionally at the end of the day. And that's what I had. That's what motivated me to write my first book, Long Road Back to Las Vegas. And that book was written in 2018. I self-published it. I didn't want to deal with any editors. I basically went, I was still so upset and pumped up, and from getting hit by the car. It was, I launched my site in June of 2017. And I decided, once my site was kind of up and running, I decided to write a book about the recovery from the crash, what led me to write the book, how I wrote it. So, and I was really lucky. I have a sister who's a clinical psychologist, and she guided me on some tips on recovery and how you move forward. And I integrated that into the launch of the new site, because launching the new site actually was part of my mental and emotional therapy. So that whole topic really is the making for the book. And again, tell your story, be original, I was pretty self-motivated because I was still pretty upset about what happened. State of Florida, I don't know if you've lived in Florida, it is a weird state. I did not make anything on the settlement. I moved on. I was happy that I still had my life, but there was no settlement because you can't sue the driver's insurance company. You have to sue the driver himself, who had declared bankruptcy 1 year earlier. There were no assets to claim. So anyway, I was just lucky to get out of Florida with my life, and the book was part of the whole healing process. So that was book number one. Again, in 2020, we got hit by the pandemic. I was kind of rolling along with my new site, LV Sports Biz. As Carol mentioned, you have to be very self-motivated to market the site. I felt as though I was the best person to kind of explain what the site was about, because I'm not a sports writer. I'm a journalist covering this interesting crossover journalistic convergence of business and marketing and sports and development and politics. And I thought I was the best person to explain that when I went to advertisers. So by 2020, the pandemic hit. And I don't know about you guys, I had a feeling this was not going to end well. And that was because, this had to do with just the way our country was kind of divided at the time. And the point was, I needed to mentally and emotionally throw myself into something else. And that was book two. I always wanted to write a book about my bicycle travel stories around the country. I realized I had this incredible inventory of bicycle stories already written. I wrote stories about 2 cross-country bike rides I did solo about myself. I went back and frankly, it was really the pandemic that motivated me, because I knew, like I said, I knew that I had to throw myself into something else to kind of cope with this mess. So it was really the writing of the book. I went back, I unearthed my old stories and re-edited them, chiseled them back up, gave them a kind of a little modern kind of veneer and gloss to them. And I came up with my second book, which was Bicycle Man: Life of Journeys. Again, I wanted complete control over that book. I self-published it. I have a company that I work with in Tampa that I like a lot. I have a person he's very responsive. I packed up the second book with photos, and it is just, I think, a really fun compilation of stories of all phases of bicycling. It's not a technical book at all. It really is a book about all kinds of crazy stories that I've been through, and also other people's like kind of funky and crazy stories too. But the real technical part of the book was figuring out how to organize this thing. And it was in late March of 2020, late at night, 11:30, midnight. It just dawned on me that this is the way I was going to organize Bicycle Man: Life of Journeys. And there's kind of a sense of symmetry to the book. So I basically was able to split up literally 37 stories into different categories that just, that happens. The light bulb went on one night, and when it went on, I said, I gotta like run with this. Who knows when it'll like go on again, So I just went with the second book. So again, just to recap, be original, tell your unique story, write about stuff that you emotionally care about, and also I want to also reemphasize the marketing angle on this. You probably don't have like a big marketing budget, and I got to tell you, in selling my book and selling both books, people who I thought would be naturals to buy the book actually didn't buy the book. And there are people who even say, I will buy the book. And I go, okay, here's how you buy the book, and they don't follow through on it. But then like those disappointments are kind of offset by the people who come out of like the woodwork, out of nowhere, to buy your book. It's kind of this, and you have to kind of tell yourself again, like Carol mentioned, it's nothing personal. Don't take things personally, although it's easy to get like pissed off and like, to people, but you have to tell yourself that people have like a million and one other things they're thinking about. They got family issues they're thinking about. They got job issues they're thinking about. This like stupid pandemic that just keeps on going on and on and on. There's a lot of like anger about that, about people who like our friends who won't get vaccinated. We don't have to go down that road, but still there's still a lot of people might not be buying your story or your book. So don't take it personally, because I found that for every person who I thought would be like a natural to buy your book was completely balanced out by someone who like just drops an email in your lap and says, "Hey, I want to buy your book." And I've been lucky to have other contacts be resourceful. That's like a really other important thing. Be resourceful in selling yourself and selling your book. I went to First Friday at the First Friday event in downtown, and I was able to work with some of the bicycle folks there to set up a table and sell my book there. And out of the blue, there are people and friendships that you just make over selling a book. In fact, I'll just wrap things up here. And just tell you that I was bicycling on the Red Rock Loop, which actually is part of my second book too, on Bicycle Man. And I'm actually sitting at the overlook, and a woman stops by in a car, and she kind of looks familiar, and we begin to like look at each other. She actually bought my book at First Friday like a month earlier, and she told me that she bought the book because she has a brother back in Omaha who had cancer, and he got into bicycling. It was his way to cope with bicycling. She wanted to buy the book to give to her brother in Omaha. And that story to me justifies writing the book almost, to hear these kind of emotional connections that your story or your book or your writing makes with people. To me, that's not, it's, thank God we have enough money to have like the material things to keep us going. But those are the stories that to me help me justify doing what I do, which is telling stories that make a connection with people.
Great job, Alan.
Yeah. And I'm more than happy to like talk to anyone with if you have any ideas or if you have any questions, feel free to send out my email as well.
We'll do the questions for all of you at the end. I just want to pick up on one thing that Alan said that really made me smile. He said about writing and putting things down on paper and putting ideas down on paper. And you can do this and have no idea where it's going. I'm gonna give you one quick example. I've always journaled my travels. I've done a lot of traveling in my life. And for me, I like to remember where I've been with places and restaurants and things. And I've always done this. So I'm writing the second book, which is finished, and it's about a couple trying to get back together again. And I think to myself, let them go to Italy. I have a lot of journal stuff about Italy. I lay down literally on index cards the information from my 3 or 4 trips to Italy, where I went. I took a map off the internet and I routed them from one end to the other, including all the places that I had information. And I looked up from 1970, are these still places that are in existence? What's the proximity? Could they have walked to this place? It was so interesting to me to be able to do this, only because I had this stuff. If somebody said to you 50 years ago when you went to Italy, where did you eat in Venice? I would never remember something like that. But my point being, I was able to remarket that. I was able to take that information, and it hit me. Wow, I found my journals and I opened them up and I said, wow, I have all this great information, firsthand information from my 3 trips to Italy. Let me do something with it. So I had the couple going to Italy, and they followed my combined trips, and it was so much fun to do. So you write things down, you never know where it's going to go. If you can find it, if you can find what you've written, that's the key, which drawer it's in. But, I just think it's important to write things down, even phrases, things that you don't know what you're ever going to use. And it's there for you because it's your words.
I also just want to add that, I have, the whole Google Analytics with my news site, and I can't believe the crap that they break things down into. I mean, it really is unbelievable. Like, where the stuff is being read and all that stuff. But I got news for you. Until sometimes it is amazing. Like, you think the natural audience would be person X, Y, and Z, and they're not reading it. But then, like I said, keep in mind that when you're writing and producing and creating your original work, you have no idea sometimes who you're touching. And that's like the most amazing thing, because sometimes those things come out of the blue back to you, and you get an email, a phone call, a letter, whatever, from someone that you're clueless about who your idea or who your story or who your book touched. So, I know sometimes it can get kind of depressing, like, Carol mentioned all the, no one gets back to you. And it is true. Like, you get blown off a lot, and, you get, but keep in mind that there's also that, that one little dart of information that's kind of entering someone's life that you might not even know about, and you still may not know about ever. So just keep on like plugging along and just, keep on trucking if you believe in your idea, and, just don't give up with it.
Hey, all right, Judy, we're ready for you. Take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity. So much of what Carol and Alan said resonates with me. Carol, before there was really a gig economy, my father was a freelance photographer. And so I grew up with that ambiance. And I think he would have struggled in today's world because he was not a self-promoter. He was terrible at that. But it turned out he had a very successful career, which I'll talk about with reference to my latest book in a few moments. Alan, of course, received an email from me because I saw an interview, a TV story on his book. And my sister, who was born 3 years before me and turned out to be autistic before anyone knew that word, gets obsessed with things, and one of her obsessions has always been bicycling, and I wanted to get it for her. So, I'm one of those people out of the blue who bought Alan's book. Carol, what you said about self-discipline and motivation, I'm like so undisciplined. When I have a project, I stick to it and I power through it, but otherwise, I like practice sloth and torpor. I used to be a workaholic. Now I'm a retired professor. I have a very lofty title. I'm Professor Emerita, University of Iowa. And no, not the Writers' Workshop. I taught for almost 30 years in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I'm an unrepentant old school newspaper reporter like Alan. I'm a magazine writer. I still freelance. I've freelanced my whole life. Now I am ashamed to say that I write a column for the Vegas Voice Senior Magazine for free because I don't believe in writing for free. I believe that you depress standards for everyone when you write for free. But the Vegas Voice did a fabulous job on the guardianship scandal. The people who run it are wonderful. It's a shoestring operation, and it allows me to vent in 400 words once a month. So I have thrown out my principles to do that. But one of my, principles is you do not write for free. You may write for less to prove yourself, as Carol did, but as soon as you can, you begin raising those standards. In connection with that, I would encourage anyone who does publish a book to join the Authors Guild. If you have one book, and I think self-publishing is fine now, you can join the Authors Guild. It's a wonderful collective. It's actually now, the president now is an old high school schoolmate of mine, which is kind of weird, a very successful author. You know, the board is full of incredibly successful celebrity authors, but it's a really good organization. And if you need legal advice, your membership will pay for itself in in a moment, and tons of resources. Also, join other organizations that may be relevant to what you want to do. An organization I belong to called Biography International has been extremely helpful in terms of mutual aid, advice, promoting things. Okay, that's me. I'm a retired professor who wants to practice sloth and torpor, but periodically gets involved in projects. My latest is this book. It's a story of the life and times of my photojournalist, social activist father, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But I've also, that was published by a press in North Carolina that publishes reference and history books. And it was a long haul to finding a publisher, and I'll tell you why. This I self-published soon after I retired. It's a collection of my father's photographs. My parents self-published a book about Chile during the Allende years before self-publishing was respectable, long before. Now it's a thing, it's perfectly okay. I published a China book with a scholarly press about Chinese journalism, which was my scholarly specialty. I helped write this book, my husband's book, of a memoir of the Cultural Revolution, which was published by Stanford University Press and is still in print after more than 30 years, 35 years, which is astonishing. So, that's my book experience, and I've written tons of articles and all that. So those are my credentials. First thing I want to say, well, let me tell you a little bit about getting my latest book published. It was a labor of 20 years. My father died in 2001. He had become a photographer after being fired from a news writing job for taking the Fifth Amendment, his constitutional right, and defying a congressional committee during the McCarthy period, the House Committee on Un-American Activities. He'd been subpoenaed to that committee because he'd been in a progressive student group in college after coming back from the war. He was a loyal vet and all that. And they wanted him to name names and, spill secrets about the big communist conspiracy, which didn't exist. And he defied them. He accused them of trampling on the Bill of Rights. He refused to answer questions about his personal and about his political affiliations and views. And so he was working for United Press in Boston then as a news writer, and they fired him. So he turned to a childhood hobby, which was photography. His big break was Life magazine. For 20 years, he was a regular Boston stringer for Life and Time and the whole Henry Luce empire. Henry Luce, the founder, did not care about the blacklist. He just wanted the best talent money could buy. So once he had broken into Life, the portals opened. Everyone who ostracized him now welcomed him. Life was in town, big deal. And he continued to be a social activist. He made it a point to document civil rights, anti-war. He ran to protests before protest photography was a thing. He was both of and ahead of his times, I say. Plus, he was a pretty cool father, and I had a pretty unusual upbringing. So I began, as soon as he died, I, hit myself in the head for not interviewing him. So, interview everyone you can before they die. But I interrogated my mother and lots of other people, and I began to do research. And unlike Alan, who says he loves writing, I hate writing. I find it so painful. I love research, and I can do research forever. But at a certain point, you have to stop. So I'd retired from teaching. I'd put out the photo book. I'd moved to Las Vegas. And I finally said, okay, put your fanny on the seat, although I stand at my computer and write. And I wrote it. And then came the problem of finding a publisher, which was very hard because my book is a hybrid. It's biography, memoir, history, journalism, visual culture. It's got philosophy, it's got poetry, it's got pictures. But finally, this place in North Carolina, which is a kind of assembly line place. 40 people put out 400 books a year. They work largely with libraries. They took it, they loved it. I had 2 good obsessive copy editor friends who edited it for me. It was very well vetted, so they hardly made any changes. They give no advances, their contract is lousy. I sent it to the Authors Guild. It was a 1.5-page contract, very simple. But the legal people at the Authors Guild sent me back 3 pages of comments about how lousy it was. But nope, it's a template. The only thing they changed was instead of giving me 10 free authors copies, they gave me 12. So I have to buy my own book and all that. But anyway, so it got out there, and it's just, it's a labor of love, but it's also a labor of posterity. I want younger generations to read this book. It's a history of the second half of the 20th century and the great social movements of our times. I want people who lived through that period to read it because it will remind us of those periods of hope and optimism and struggle and all that. So I have been trying to get word of the book out there. And my first piece of advice would be, well, not really advice, it's an observation. As with just about everything, connections and relationships matter as much as or more than merit, though merit doesn't hurt. So be kind to people and generous with your connections and support. When friends and colleagues publish books, buy them. Don't expect quid pro quo, but what goes around does sometimes come around. And the extent to which I've gotten word about my book out there comes from people I know or people who know people I know. So first, I've told you a little bit about getting published. And of course, it helps to have a good title and a nice cover. It doesn't matter now if it's self-published or published by a traditional publisher. Promoting your book, either way, is up to you for the most part. And a lot of it entails banging your head against a brick wall, okay? So all that stuff, Carol and Alan both say, don't take it personally. I take it personally, like, people are just ridiculous, but, you get over it. Okay, before your book is out there, blurbs. Ask friends, colleagues, strangers. Judiciously, of course, you may be surprised at what comes back. And if Neil, in a while, will let me share my screen, I'll show you a few of the blurbs I got, which were just floored me, And then, of course, I sent everyone who had written a blurb. They didn't all fit on the back of the book, but they all fit on the publisher's site and the Amazon site, and you can use them for promotion. I sent everyone a free book, right? Website, social media, blah, blah, blah. I'm not real good at that. I did some Instagram and then I ran out of steam. But if you're conscientious, you should do Instagram, you should do Twitter, you should have a website and keep updating it. I purchased my website stuff from the Authors Guild and I don't update it, which I should, but you should join organizations and announce things through those. You can write your own press releases, something to send out that summarizes your book. And again, often organizations you belong to or that are interested in what you're doing will put up information for you. Media coverage, okay? On this past Father's Day, a Las Vegas Review-Journal feature writer did a beautiful spread about the book and my father's career, and it featured a big picture of me, which was kind of, I don't like that. I don't like self-promoting my dad and his work, but it was amazing, and it's online. And the reason that happened was I wrote the Review Journal. It somehow got to an editor, but at the same time, I asked some friends who worked at the Review Journal if they had a recommendation for a writer there who might be interested. And so both those things converged at the same time. I happened to email the writer they suggested at the same time as his editor told him to look into this. So again, you've got to use every avenue you can think of. And more often than not, it will be somebody you know or somebody you know who knows someone. My own hometown library was interested in the book. There's a lecture series in my old hometown that might be interested in doing an event. But in my case, in getting media coverage, my old and new communities came through. It was Iowa City, where I lived for a long time. I had radio, I had press, I had PR from the university. And then this new hometown of mine, Las Vegas, the Review Journal, which was fabulous. And then I have a spot at the Las Vegas Book Festival, October 23rd. And that came about because, again, convergence. Months ago, I wrote one of the organizers who said, we'll get back to you. They never got back to me, but apparently they had asked somebody to look into doing a photo event. And then I asked a friend who had a friend on the literary committee, you know, can you tell someone about this? And she, that literary committee member, proposed a panel that got to this staff member while he was still musing months later. And so I have my own session, and I put together the most ambitious slideshow ever with 100 pictures. So please, please, please come. It's October 23rd at noontime in room 125 at the historic 5th Street School. So you do virtual presentations. My father joined an organization called the American Society of Magazine Photographers in 1958. It later became the American Society of Media Photographers, ASMP. So he's an old icon member of that organization, which you know struggles for copyright and fair compensation and mentors young photographers. The New England chapter, which was my father's chapter, is doing an online event. You know, you just pull out all the, and so basically, I have accomplished nothing without a contact. Nothing. And probably 80% of what I've attempted has dissipated in the air. You know, nothing's come of it. I hate this part. The only thing that motivates me is that my dad's work is so fabulous. I want the world to see it and appreciate it. And so, again, I would just say, you know, you have to use your imagination. I've done some bookstore events online. The bookstore, the independent bookstore where I lived for 30 years, Prairie Lights in Iowa City, is a wonderful bookstore that tries to help everyone. And I knew they were struggling during the pandemic. And it's much harder to sell books at an online event than at an in-person event. Because in person, you've got the stacks of books there, you've got the author who can autograph. So I proposed a 3-author event. 3 of us who'd written family histories. And one of these authors is a real VIP author. The other one was an unknown author, and I'm an unknown author. And so the 3 of us did a conversation, which was absolutely fabulous. Plus, I provided the bookstore with prints of my father's work. So every book, every copy of any of the 3 books sold through the store would have a special little bonus picture in it. So, you know, you think of things that are not only helping yourself and your book, but the people who are helping you. You try to help them. With my American Society of Media Photographers appearance, I am doing it in conversation with one of the older current members who knew my father. And so they're getting him out there, and they love having him online. And, you know, it's working for everybody. So you've got to rack your brains. With the Las Vegas Book Festival event, I was astonished. They insisted on giving me an honorarium. I think they gave me their lowest amount, $250. You don't usually get money for trying to sell your book, right? Or trying to promote something. And I said, well, I don't need an honorarium. I'm going to give this back in the form of free books to the first 10 high school or college students who come to my session. I don't know if 10 people will come to my session, let alone 10 students. But that's my little thing. Plus, I'm giving free prints to everyone who attends my session. I have no idea if 2 people will come or if 30 people will come, but we'll see. You know, I know at least 2 people are coming. Let's put it that way. But if you have any friends or children or grandchildren who are high school or college students, tell them to come, suffer through my 100 pictures, and get a free book. And, you know, you just have to tear your hair out and use everything you can imagine to get the word out. That's it. And, Lynn, I have an outline I can send you with links and everything, so you can just send that out, and you can look up your own links.
Great. That's great. Thank you. Well, a ton of information. I don't know about you guys, but I wrote 2 pages worth. And, you know, the themes come over and over again, the same recurrent themes of being resourceful and original and making contacts and connections and your own experiences and ideas. And, you know, they're the same words that we all keep in our head all the time. I don't want to talk. I want to open this up as promised, 30 minutes we have left, to anybody that has a question. Please just come forward and take off your mute and just either direct it to somebody or just an open question and somebody will pick it up.
I've got my hand up.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yes, I just have a quick question. Judy, you mentioned something like Vegas Voice for Seniors. I didn't write it down right, and I wondered what that was officially.
It's a
Well, what's the
monthly.
name? What's the name?
It's called The Vegas Voice.
The Vegas Books?
The
Voice.
Vegas Voice.
Voice.
Voice. Oh, okay.
The Vegas Voice. It's a throwaway monthly magazine full of advertising and columns by grumpy, funny old people. I mean, actually, some of the columnists are pretty amazing. There's a woman who was a child actress in Hollywood who always has another story for you. There's someone who reviews movies. There's a guy who writes about veterans. And then the publisher and his wife are the people. His wife, mainly, Ronna Goodman, broke the guardianship scandal story. Although other people take credit for that, but she was the one who broke it and got reforms through the state legislature when basically old people were being kidnapped from their homes and assigned to private guardians. I mean, it was just astonishing. I first read about it in the New Yorker, and as soon as I got to, which credited the Vegas Voice, and as soon as I got to Las Vegas, I wanted to meet these people. And they're very cool people. And the magazine wins awards from senior magazine associations and stuff. But I think it's been going like 7 or 8 years. And you can pick it up in the libraries. Most of the public libraries will have a stack of it every month. And it is not, you know, it is not a great sophisticated work of journalism, but it's very interesting, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And the people who run it are amazing, just wonderful people.
Thank you.
Oh, and also when I do something political in it, I usually get hate mail.
Of course.
So.
I think Starline had a question.
I have 2, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
They're 2 different ideas. Okay, the first thing, my book, and I've really reflected on the story that I want to say is not the story people want to hear. I was 1 October survivor. And there's a lot of books and everyone wants to write a book, especially around the first of the year or the October 1st, that everyone comes out of the woodworks and wants to write their book. But the story that I want is my story, and the story is the PTSD and how we have had to navigate that, not exactly what happened that night. Everyone wants to know the details of what happened that night. And I'll never write about that. And my mom's blocked it out. Like what I've seen is different than what my mom sees. So we're not going there. But my problem is the legal. Like there's lawsuits that are going on. It's very touchy and I don't know how to navigate that. Does that make sense?
You
Did I
need a
mute
lawyer.
Did I mute? I don't know how to do this.
No, you're fine.
Okay, because you guys disappeared. You're really little on my screen.
I used to teach a summer writing festival course at Iowa called Turning Personal Experience into Prose.
Okay.
And it was a really interesting class because some people came with the idea of writing and publishing a book. Other people were writing for their children or grandchildren. Other people were just writing for self-expression.
Okay.
But, you know, my feeling is to get started with something like that, that is so personal and so painful, don't try to anticipate the book at the end. Just write what you're thinking and feeling and have to say. And then, because everything you write is subject to revision.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, maybe 3 times revision, it may be 30 times revision, you know, but I don't think you can worry about how you're going to present it at the outset with something that is that deep and personal. That would just be my initial, you know, bit of.
That's my thing. I write about it. I write a lot in my head. Does that make sense? Like not on paper. And like when I write things, I throw them away because I don't want to read them again. So I don't have a lot of stuff. If it's too painful, I throw it away because I don't want anybody else to find it.
But-
like in my house.
But something that's painful is touching, and you can pull something out of that. I have to tell you that I had a teacher in one of my schools who wrote a book about her bipolar journey. It was very raw, very real, very emotional and very personal. And I was amazed at the things that she put in it. She had no idea where it was going through. She started through a church group. She actually had her first, and Sheila can remember this, she had her first book talk at my house, at my book club. She went on to work herself through this topic, not knowing where it was going to go. And basically it was a very cathartic thing for her. She does TED Talks all the time now. She's sold millions of these books because the bipolar issue touched people. As raw as it was, people could identify with it. So your memoir about what happened and the aspect of PTSD, I guarantee you, everybody who was in there has some aspect of that, and it comes
They
back
do.
to them.
And like for my situation, and you probably would be surprised with you, Lynn, because of our history. This wasn't my first episode of PTSD. It's just when it was diagnosed with me. I have PTSD from a robbery at gunpoint, and then also a boat crash that happened the week before I started teaching with you, Lynn, that I didn't realize I had PTSD and I couldn't navigate that. And I thought I was being this horrible teacher who couldn't have it together. But I had this PTSD from this that happened the week before I started a new job. But so it's like some of us, this isn't even like, this is just triggering. So like that's, and a lot of people relate PTSD to like veterans. You know, it's very much, you know, veterans have PTSD. They don't realize there's normal people out there. My daughter, she just started at the Tournament of Kings. She's a horse handler. Her dream job, she's down the street from Mandalay Bay. So she's dealing with that, you know, so people just don't see, I find, you know.
May I make a suggestion? Can you hear me? May I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
Don't, you know, and everybody has said this, and Judy, I really like what you said too. When I started out with Adventures of Mo, I mean, I had something in mind, but I just wrote. Keep a diary. Nobody else has to see it but you. And how do you survive every day? Like, gee, I went to the supermarket, or I'm walking through the parking lot and a car backfired. You know, what goes through your mind, and how you deal with it. It can be a learning tool. It's also very cathartic. I think you said this too, Lynn. Writing is very cathartic. Okay. So, and it really helps you through the process. So if you just keep a journal, and every day you can write a couple sentences, the next day write a paragraph, the next day, next day, etc. You write a page, and then pretty soon things may start to gel for you, because the story can be, this is what I've gone through, and I'm sure other people have, but this is how I survive it. And it's you're an everyday person. I'm an everyday person. That I would like to know that. So it can be like a self-help type of book. I don't know if that would work. But I see that right now, just off the top of my head. And as you're writing your diary, you may think of a different spin, a different angle.
There's
But-
stories within stories, for sure.
But
Yeah,
you cannot throw stuff out. You cannot throw stuff out. Otherwise, you'll have nothing. You'll have nothing.
That's what I have.
and you may find that as you're recording over time, that things fall into a pattern, things fall into some kind of organizational form. Like I talked about last week about the index cards. You may have all these notes, and then you take a marker or you take a highlighter, and you go through them, and you see where they fit in, and that could be the framework of your story. But God, don't throw stuff away. Try to clean out your wastebasket and see if you
Right,
have
it's
anything.
long gone.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about being original and all that, which of course is important, but I think also looking at some books about other people's struggles with things that have happened to them will help you think about how to frame things. And there's a book I read recently, just an astonishing book, that I happened to pick up at a library. It's called Comfort, A Journey Through Grief, by a woman, a novelist named Anne Hood, who lost a daughter to a sudden illness. And the book is about, I mean, it recounts what happened, but most of the book is about what happened afterwards, and how at every point this event influenced her life and how she responded to things. It's a short book. It's an absolutely astonishing, beautiful book. So something like that, pick and choose from memoirs that somehow may have elements that will help you put things together.
Okay.
Lynn,
Yeah,
I have a question following on to Starlin's theme. And bless you, Starlin, and I hope you do that book. I really do. Whether you want to call it PTSD or having developed some maladaptive coping mechanisms that, I had to overcome from early in my life through things that happened. I'd like to write about them and how I overcame them, but they come back and so forth. For instance, I ran away from home when I was 14 and hitchhiked my way around the southeastern United States. And that was back in the day, when it was at least a little bit safer, and nothing ever happened to me, thank God. I never got attacked, touched, nothing. But I think it's important. And I think there's a story to be told and a lesson to be learned. But I don't know that I want outside of you people. And I just kind of opened up about that. It's hard to talk about that. I don't know that I want the entire world, so to speak, to know that, but it's an important inflection point. So how do you overcome that fear? And maybe Judy can talk about that.
well, you can tell a story. You can tell it in the third person, and it could be your experiences, but it could be through somebody else's voice and somebody else's name and somebody else's experience. You can start with that, like we talked about last week a little bit. You can start with a seed, and people tell me this all the time. You start with a seed of an idea of truth, and it can leave exactly what happened and go in a different direction. It doesn't have to be your story. It could be a story about experiences and pain, but it doesn't have to personalize to you.
Mhm. So
Does
just,
does that
just-
make sense?
just follow the arc, but sort of under a pseudonym or
Yeah,
something.
and tell it in the third person, not in the first person.
Mhm.
I mean, does that make sense to somebody
Yeah.
who's much more experienced than I am? Does that make sense?
I think, some stories don't have to be shared with other people, right? You might want to just write it for yourself or for people who are close to you. And it also may be that the time hasn't come yet, that someday you may feel ready. But I think you need to have a purpose in sharing. If the purpose is to express yourself and get this out there, that's one purpose. If a purpose is to help other people who may face this situation, that's another purpose. I think you have to
Absolutely.
decide whether whether your purpose is overriding enough for you to share the story. I don't think
Well,
you should be.
And the point is, I mean, I live to tell the tale. And nothing ever happened
That's right.
miraculously.
Mhm.
I never got strung out on drugs. I never even touched them, so miraculously is more the story.
But you were going through all sorts of tumult and torture at the
100%,
time that people go
100%.
through. And you're not recommending that they repeat your method of going hitchhiking,
No.
of course. But the fact that you evidently were able to work some things out that way might be useful to people. I think if you come to the point where it's worth sharing,
Mhm.
then you share it. Otherwise, if you think you want to write about it, you just write about it. Start writing about it.
And
And
Yeah.
the fact that you the fact that you came out on the other end of it, at the other end of it, that's a triumph. This person I knew who wrote about the bipolar experience, she was talking about it in a support group in her church basement. That's where it started. And the people that responded to it, because they themselves had gone through that, it just went through the roof. And then it became something where she was able to help people with it. And she came out at the other end after struggle and struggle and struggle. So, like Judy said, there's a purpose involved in one telling a story, just getting it up and getting it out and making it public, and then maybe people relate to that, and it becomes something that helps people. So it really depends upon your motivation, I think.
Well, I think that's my hope, is to help others always.
Well, there you go.
But you may not want to write it. That's the other thing. I've been a caregiver for my husband for over 20 years, and I can't even begin to tell you the things that we've gone through. Okay. He's got a bad heart, and once you have a bad heart, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And I started writing a book about it. And I realized after the first page, I don't want to write this. It's not that I don't want to share it. I don't want to relive it. And I was also asked to be the Las Vegas or Nevada caregiver, because I've been a caregiver for so long. And the caregiving group, the National Association, asked me to be the caregiver for Nevada. I didn't want it. I eat, breathe, drink, live sickness, doctor visits, tests, operations, all this stuff. I didn't want it anymore. So you may decide that it's a story that you may want to share with just a handful of people, but it's in here. You don't want to share it elsewhere. And that's okay. That's okay too. Like Judy said, you've got to decide what your purpose is. For me, it came across very clear. I did not want to do this. And so I didn't waste any more time with it. I wanted to do something else. So purpose, motivation. What do you hope when people read your book after they turn the last page? What do you want them to know? What is your purpose? That's the thing that you've got to think about.
Well, I think it's like Starlin. I think it's like starting the journey. It was a pivot point 100% in my life. And there's an arc. And I think starting the journey and finding out what happens, like Starlin is, I think I hear her saying, she needs to find out where that journey leads her.
think
So-
Joey had a question or a comment, and then Sheila will go
I
after.
did. I have one question for Judy. I want to know her father's name. I may have missed it. She may have told us, but who is this photographer that I have to research? Oh, you're on mute.
All
Oh,
right, yeah,
yeah.
okay. His name is Ted Pollenbaum, Polumbaum. And you'll be getting an outline of my
Oh.
talk. So that has the title of my book, which is The Life and Legacy of Ted Pollenbaum. Probably the first thing that will pop up is the museum collection. His archives reside with the museum, which ran this huge museum in Washington, D.C. Did anyone go there? For like 15 years, and was very profligate and sold the building right before the pandemic, luckily. But they still have collections and archives, and they've been very good custodians of his work. So they have a page about him. And then some other things. Anyway, he was not a famous celebrity photographer. In fact, he opposed the syndrome of the celebrity photographer, but he was very successful and very well known among photographers. So,
Well, you have combined a couple of things I'm interested in, and one is politics
mhm.
and Alan, sports. I have to tell you, Alan, I married a jock when I was 19, and we were married for 69 years, and he spent all of that time trying to make a jock out of me. All that was succeeded with, I learned to play golf pretty well, and I skied and bicycle rode and all of that, but mostly my heart was in maybe writing. And I determined that someday I would be a writer. And I started at the age of 85 and wrote my own book and self-published it. But I did that too soon because I was very immature as a writer. I'm now 92 and I think I'm ready to rewrite the second edition of it.
Wow.
That's all. Thank you.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Fascinating.
That's awesome.
I also wanted to mention about so-called sports writing. Some of the greatest journalism is sports writing, and it's not about sports. It's about culture. It's about business. It's about relationships. It's about, and so. I mean, if you ever write something about the jock, and that would be a wonderful book, I think.
I come from Philadelphia, a great sports town, and Len was forever cutting out articles or showing me articles that the sports writers had written that I would have skipped over, that's all. And they're marvelous. They really were inspiring.
So let's give Sheila an opportunity.
So I have a very practical question, which is, fast as I wrote everybody's information down, I missed the titles of most of the books, and I would love to see them and figure out how to order them. I'm assuming almost everything is available on Amazon. So if we could post those, that would be great. And for Carol, I'd love to read one of your articles. If you could post that, that would be so much fun, since you are an article writer. So, and I wanted to say thank you to everybody today. I've enjoyed every single presentation. Thank you.
I will put up on the chat thing a link, the publisher's link to my book. They're having a special. A discount. Actually, they overpriced the book, which was my biggest disappointment, but they're having a 30% off thing when I told them about the book festival. And then I said, can't you extend it a little more? And they extended it through December. It's 30% off. And so if you order it through the publisher, it's a little less than if you order it on Amazon. So I'll put up the publisher's link right now on the chat thing.
Oh, I was going to suggest maybe if everybody can send, if it's all right with you, Neil, I'm volunteering you. Tell me if it's
Oh,
not
okay.
right. If everybody can send Neil their website, if they have a website, their email address, and their books, and maybe Neil, you can cut and paste it and put it all in an email for us. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Thank
I'd
you.
be-
Thank you. I have a question for Sharon. You there, Sharon? Yes, I don't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
So I read in your thank you that you wrote from last week. I appreciate that, by the way, that you decided on a memoir about a couple, I assume your parents during World War II, like a love story.
Yes.
Has any of this helped you? Has any of this given you a little bit of
Oh,
of
absolutely.
footing for what you need to do? Why don't
Uh,
you share that with us?
I spent several hours yesterday rereading parts of World War II history. My father actually landed on Utah Beach, which was the first landing of 5 on D-Day. And at the time that he got greetings from the draft board, my mother and him had only been married for 6 months. So both of them have an incredible story prior to meeting each other and getting married. The other wonderful thing about it is that, God bless my father, I have love letters from him to my mother. And they actually, any location that he wrote or disclosed, they actually took a razor blade.
Yeah.
And I have those.
Acted
I was telling Jade, one of the letters he wrote on June 28th, and he actually apologized because it had been 22 days since he had written a letter. Now, mind you, they had landed on the beaches at Normandy and overtook 5 cities, but he's apologizing. So anyway, long story short, it's just an incredible love story. I don't normally think of grown adults knowing unconditional love or being able to give unconditional love the way that a child does or the way that an animal does. We seem to lose that along the way. And my father never lost that. So to answer your question, I have gone crazy with index cards. I've done some background research, which I wanted to make sure that the documents, the Army documents that I have, everything matched in terms of when he was wounded, where he was wounded, what battle he was wounded. The wounded, he got wounded on July 11th and was actually in the town of Cherbourg. But long story short, he made it home. Very serious injuries, went on to live a full life. And in one of the letters, he had promised my mother his unconditional love, a house, and a baby. And here I am. So
Oh, Sharon, even from the perspective of love letters, of people writing love letters to each other, that's lost. I mean, young people don't do that. It's like a quick bullet on an email or a voicemail or a text or an abbreviation that some of us don't even understand what the letters mean. That's a beautiful thing, and I'm sure many of us have love letters either from ourselves or certainly from our parents during the war, and it's treasure, and there are things that that may not be that personal that you would want to share in terms of giving voice to each one of the characters. You know, we talked about voice and
Yeah.
Terry Emery is going to talk about voice on November 1st, but that's a wonderful, using somebody else's words. That's a wonderful way to develop, and Sheila and Richard are going to talk about character next week, a wonderful way to express character of somebody. And as I said, a lost art, but something that those of us that have those, it's absolutely a treasure.
I think
Yeah,
World War II stories are really evergreen. I mean, and will be as long as our generation and even
Is
our
alive.
children's generation are alive. Exactly. I mean, there's a huge interest in those stories, and it's great that you have that original documentation and that you're checking it against Army documents. Also, there are huge numbers. I mean, there's just a vast volume of literature out there, a lot of it online, about World War II and histories
Yep.
and Army and military sponsored histories. And for my book about my dad, he spent the war in the Pacific Theater. And I had never really interviewed him about it. There was one story he told over and over about integrating the Army for one night. You know, so I had that story. And the best information I had about his path was from an interview he did with my older son as a 6th grade homework assignment. So I had that. And there was an Army buddy of his who was still alive when I was researching the book. But otherwise, I just delved into all the writing about the places he'd been. And it was, you know, there's so many resources about that period. And do it. I mean, absolutely do it. People want to read that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a story worth telling. And as I said, I mean, on a lot of levels, obviously not everyone is as lucky as I was to have two parents who adored each other in an incredible home setting. And I think the older that I got, the more I appreciated that. And to have the pictures and the documents and the letters, I consider that to be very fortunate. So wish me luck.
I wish you luck. Another thing is there's a huge fetish about family dysfunction in memoirs. And so, you know, when you write about wonderful families, you're writing against the current. But I would encourage you to go back to Russell Baker's memoirs. I mean, he had a huge bestseller about a wonderful, loving family. I think it's called Growing Up, the first volume. And yeah, we wish you luck for sure, but you'll do it, I'm sure.
Well, I think we're over time. I don't want to take any more time. Neil's a busy man. I thank you. You know, when you do something like this and you put these little pieces together, you don't know how it's going to turn out. This was so enlightening, and I thank the three presenters, Alan and Carol and Judy, so much. And I thank the people who shared, the four people who shared a little bit of their ideas about what they want to do. And I just like to summarize with one thing. I was asked last week about the difference between a prologue and a preface, and I did some research, and this is what I found out. I emailed Joy, but I'm going to do it for the rest of you. Prologue perhaps acts as a beginning of a story, as if it sets it up as what's to come, including information on character or events which took place before the story, perhaps as a backstory to give needed information for better understanding of what is to come, usually found in a work of fiction. A preface, on the other hand, is possibly written by another author indicating what to expect, usually found in nonfiction books, a short introductory essay or quote or lyrics of a song or something explaining why the author chose to write the book. So they are different things. I asked my editor hired, and I looked it up myself, so that gives you a little feedback. And thank you so much to everybody, especially to Neil for putting this together for us. You'll get an email with the information that we talked about. And next week we can anticipate Sheila and Richard talking about character development. How to do right. And,
Perfect.
thank you all. I hope you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great week. Be safe.